All right. Let's dive into these Path of Exile 2 patch notes you sent over.
Yeah.
It looks like the devs have been busy.
Oh, yeah. Lots to talk about.
A ton of info,
Yeah.
lots of quality of life changes, balance tweaks. Where do you even want to begin?
Well, the changes to exploration definitely stand out.
Sure.
Adding fast travel between checkpoints and increasing their frequency, especially at entrances and exits,
Right.
that's huge.
Yeah.
For streamlining the gameplay experience.
Yeah, no more running back and forth through entire zones.
Exactly.
Just to get back to where you were.
Huge time saver.
Right.
It's the little things.
Yeah.
But this is going to make a big difference.
Absolutely.
Anything else jump out at you in that vein?
Well, I did see
Mm-hmm.
the reduction in passive point respec costs.
Yeah, that's a big one.
It seems minor,
Yeah.
but it actually has the potential to really shake up the meta.
Oh, absolutely.
Think about it.
Yeah.
Respecting becomes less of a commitment,
Less of a risk. Yeah.
allowing players to experiment with builds more freely.
Totally. Especially high-level players.
Okay.
Will be able to tweak their builds for specific encounters or experiment with new skill combinations without breaking the bank.
So you're thinking we'll see more build diversity.
Yeah, I think so.
People trying out off-meta stuff without the fear of wasting points.
Exactly.
It-
It could lead to some really interesting innovations.
I love that.
Yeah.
Okay, so more exploration, more build experimentation.
Mm-hmm.
What about difficulty?
Right.
Any tweaks there?
The changes to the trial of the Sekimas are interesting.
Okay.
Reducing honor damage taken at close range and fixing that damage over time bug.
Uh-huh.
Are you familiar with those mechanics?
Enough to know they were causing some headaches,
Oh, yeah.
especially for melee builds, right?
Right. So these adjustments make the trial less punishing
Okay.
for those who like to get up close and personal.
Interesting.
It's a good example of the developers fine-tuning the difficulty to reward skill over specific builds or strategies.
So it's not just a flat nerf.
Right.
It's more about pushing players to really master their playstyle.
Exactly. It rewards players who understand the mechanics and can execute them well.
Got it. So exploration is smoother builds are more flexible.
Mhm.
What about the end game?
Yeah.
Any news from the depths of Wraeclast?
The endgame changes are probably the most significant in terms of overall balance.
Okay.
Reducing monster damage and density in high-tier maps is going to make a big difference for a lot of players.
Especially those who are feeling like the end game was a bit too much of a slog.
Exactly. Specifically, removing elemental resistance penalties.
Right.
Removes a major layer of complexity and frustration.
Oh, yeah. Those penalties were rough.
Yeah,
You could really get punished for not having perfectly optimized gear.
Absolutely. And the changes to chaos damage are notable.
Okay.
Scaling it back and disabling volatile crystals for now suggests they're rethinking how those mechanics work in the endgame.
Speaking of rethinking things.
Yeah.
What about those volatile plants and siphon flasks?
Mm-hmm.
Weren't those getting tweaked too?
Yes. The damage from volatile plants and the charges consumed by siphon flasks have been reduced.
Oh, okay.
Again, it's all about making the endgame more manageable without trivializing it. What really intrigues me, though,
Yeah.
is the change to charms.
Oh, yeah.
Charm lovers unite.
Tell me about that.
Making charm modifiers on belts more common and accessible at lower levels
Mm-hmm.
is going to have a huge impact on build diversity, especially early on.
It's like opening up a whole new world of customization options, right?
Exactly.
Instead of waiting until late game to get those juicy charm bonuses,
Right.
you can start experimenting much earlier.
Exactly. It could lead to some really creative and unconventional builds,
Cool.
which is always exciting.
Okay, so we've covered exploration, respecting the trial, and some big end game changes.
Mm-hmm.
What's next on our patch notes adventure?
Well, the skill and gem adjustments are pretty extensive.
Okay.
There are some interesting nerfs,
Yep.
like the changes to Skeletal Arsonist, Tornado Vine Arrow, and Magnetic Salvo.
Nerf's always juicy.
Yeah, they are.
What's the thinking behind those?
Right.
Are they just trying to bring some skills down a peg?
It's more nuanced than that.
Okay.
Take Skeletal Arsonists, for example.
Right.
Matching their spirit costs to other skeleton mages addresses a potential balance issue
Okay.
where they were a bit too spammy and efficient.
Interesting.
It's about fine-tuning resource management.
So it's not a straight-up nerf,
Right.
but more of a rebalancing to make sure the cost reflects the benefit.
Exactly.
What about Tornado and Vine Arrow?
Those changes address a similar concern.
Okay.
Their damage over time component was overshadowing their intended role as setup skills.
Right.
By toning that down, they become more specialized,
Gotcha.
encouraging players to use them strategically rather than as primary damage dealers.
Okay, that makes sense. And Magnetic Salvo.
Limiting it to the player's own lightning arrows prevents potential exploits in group play, where players could stack arrows for massive damage bursts.
Ah, so it's more of a bug fix
Hey.
than a balance change. Makes sense.
Mm-hmm.
What about the buffs?
Yeah.
Any skills getting some love in this patch?
There are a lot of buffs, actually. It seems the developers are really trying to broaden the spectrum of viable builds.
Okay, cool.
Shield skills, for example, have been buffed across the board.
I'm curious about that.
Yeah.
What kind of changes are we talking about?
Yeah.
Is it just flat damage increases
Yeah.
or something more
It's
interesting?
a combination of things.
Okay.
Some skills have received direct damage buffs, while others have had their mechanics tweaked to make them more effective.
So they're not just throwing numbers at the problem.
Right.
They're actually thinking about how these skills feel to play.
Exactly. They're taking a holistic approach to balance,
I like that.
considering both numerical values and the overall gameplay experience.
It shows they really care about making each build feel unique and fun to play.
Yeah, I think so.
What other skills got some love?
Bow skills, particularly those that synergize with frenzy charges, have received some nice improvements.
Okay.
This could make bow builds a more dominant force, especially in high-level content where frenzy charges are more easily maintained.
I can already see the speedrunners figuring out how to break the game with those buffs.
Oh, yeah, definitely.
But it's not just about the damage, right?
Right.
What else makes those bow skill changes interesting?
Well, they're encouraging a more aggressive play style
Okay.
by buffing skills that reward players for staying in combat and generating frenzy charges.
Uh-huh.
They're shifting away from the more cautious, kite-heavy approach that some bow builds relied on.
So it's about making the gameplay more dynamic and engaging.
Yeah, exactly.
I can see how that would appeal to a lot of players.
Mm-hmm.
What about those darker, more niche builds?
Right.
Did any of those get any attention?
Oh, absolutely.
Okay.
Bone spells and chaos damage over time spells in the occult section have been buffed,
Cool.
making them more viable options.
You know me, I love a good off-meta build.
Yeah, you do.
What kind of changes are we talking about? Is it enough to make those builds truly competitive?
It's hard to say for sure until we see them in action, but the changes are significant enough to warrant some experimentation.
Okay.
The buffs focus on improving both damage output and survivability,
Uh-huh.
addressing some of the key weaknesses those builds had previously.
It sounds like the devs are really trying to create a more diverse and balanced meta,
Yeah, I think that's a big part of it.
where there's room for all kinds of builds to thrive.
Mm-hmm.
Is that your takeaway as well?
Absolutely. And they're not just focusing on the most popular builds.
Right.
They're giving some attention to those less traveled paths like crossbows and quarterstaves.
Interesting.
Crossbow skills, particularly at higher tiers, have been improved.
Okay.
And some underperforming quarterstaff abilities have also received buffs.
Oh.
These changes may not create the most meta-defining builds,
Right.
but they demonstrate a commitment to ensuring that a wide range of options are viable.
So even if you're not min-maxing for the absolute best build,
Right.
you can still have fun and be successful with something a little more off the beaten path.
Precisely, it's about giving players more freedom to choose a playstyle that suits them,
Mm-hmm.
rather than feeling forced into whatever the current meta dictates.
Okay, so we've got a good handle on the school changes now.
Yeah.
Let's talk about those support gems.
Okay.
We already touched on those new additions, Tremors and Bidding.
Right.
Can you give us a little more insight into those?
Yeah.
What kind of potential do they have for shaking things up?
Tremors is going to be an interesting one.
Okay.
It allows you to stack aftershocks,
Uh-huh.
which are essentially area of effect explosions,
Gotcha.
but it comes at a cost of damage.
So it's not just a straight-up damage boost. It's
Mhm.
more about strategic decision-making.
Exactly. It's about weighing the benefits of increased area control and disruption against the potential loss of raw damage output.
Interesting.
It could be particularly effective in certain situations, like against bosses or in tight spaces where those aftershocks can really shine.
Sounds like it could create some fun build synergies. What about Bidding?
Bidding is specifically designed to enhance the damage of minions' command skills.
Okay.
This could have a significant impact on minion builds, which have always been a popular but sometimes overlooked archetype.
So we're talking about potentially making summoners even more powerful.
Potentially,
yeah.
yes.
Wow.
It depends on how players leverage this new support gem and how it interacts with existing minion skills and mechanics.
Right.
It's definitely something that minion enthusiasts will want to experiment with.
Cool.
But for me, the most exciting changes are to the exposure support gems.
Oh, yeah. The removal of the damage penalties.
Big change.
That was a huge talking point in the community.
Absolutely.
What kind of impact do you think that will have on the game?
Removing the damage penalty from fire, lightning, and cold exposure supports is a game changer,
Wow.
especially for those who enjoy playing exposure builds. These builds, which focus on inflicting elemental ailments to make enemies more vulnerable to damage,
Mm,
were often hindered by that penalty.
right.
Now players can fully embrace the exposure playstyle without sacrificing damage output.
So it's like they've unlocked a whole new level of power for these builds.
Yeah, I think so.
What kind of ripple effects do you think that will have on the meta?
It's hard to predict exactly how the meta will shift, but it's safe to say that exposure builds will become much more popular
Yeah.
and potentially even dominant in certain areas of the game.
Interesting.
It's going to be fascinating to see how players adapt to these changes and what new strategies they come up with.